The Breakers, the New Zealand Breakers, unfortunately, they have reverted back to the team we thought they were. And you did lay this out, I think, in our last podcast. Nice little stretch, cute. You're winning games. Everything's honkadory. Next up, you're facing maybe two of the better teams. What's going to happen there? 2 losses, including an absolute stinker against Sydney. And of course, as we always note, the Breakers, the least New Zealand, Aotearoa Kiwi franchise basically in existence right now. So again, if you're stressing about the Warriors not having enough Kiwis in their team, switch your attention to the New Zealand Breakers. I don't want to talk about the Breakers. They stink. The Sydney Kings, who defeated the Breakers, I don't know if they've got any Kiwis in their team. Do they have any Kiwis?
They have Sam Timmins right at the bottom of their roster, who did get, because they won by so much against the Breakers, did get a minute or two at the end of that game.
And
so that was nice.
He's a former Breaker.
He's a former Breaker.
And he's from New Zealand.
Indeed.
So he
just signed with, I think he might have re-signed with Otago. I can't remember, but he signed up for the next, what do you call them, NBL season.
But he was a Kiwi who was with the Breakers, but he wasn't good enough to stay with the Breakers because he's a Kiwi. So he went to Sydney, where they do like Kiwis, because a lot of these Australian teams do love a Kiwi. I'm looking at the top of the NBL rankings, and my question to you is going to be break down some of the best Kiwis in the NBL. Brisbane, they are 5th. And I know they've got that Tyrell Harrison dude who's a big centre. He's really good. Tasmania are 3rd. Sydney's 5th. Sorry, Sydney's 4th, Brisbane is 5th, Tasmania is 3rd. We know that Tommy Vodanovic has signed with Tasmania, I believe, so watch out for that. Perth, we've talked about them. High concentration of Kiwis, Hiram Harris, Ty Webster most notably at the moment. And then Melbourne, maybe the most Kiwi franchise, considering they've got a Kiwi coach, they've got Shea Illy, and I'm not sure if they've got anyone else, so I might have just countered my own argument there. Let's start with Melbourne. Any other Kiwis besides Shea Illy catching your attention?
Well, they don't have the Kiwi coach. They got Dean Vickerman as coach, but he did formerly coach the Breakers, so there is a Kiwi strong connection. I think.
Is he an Aussie?
He is an Australian, but I think they have a Kiwi assistant coach, or at least they have in the past. Like you'd have to check that while I'm talking because I can't remember. I don't keep enough track of the coaches, but just to suffice to say, 3 or 4 teams have Kiwi assistant coaches this season. The Breakers are not one of them.
Yeah,
the Breakers don't have a Kiwi assistant. That goes without saying, perhaps, I guess, if you've been tracking the Breakers anyway.
I've just had my mind's been blown. I thought Dean Vickerman was just true blue Kiwi for as long as I can remember him being a basketball coach. So shout out Dean Vickerman, true blue Aussie. Back on Melbourne.
So Melbourne have Shea Illy, the number 1 Kiwi in the NBL, has been for a couple of years and is having one of his best seasons this year. So nothing's changed. He's as good as ever. Didn't play against the Breakers because he had a minor concussion, and because he's had a history of concussions, they want to play that safe. So hopefully he'll be back this week, but if he's not, that'll be why. It's just an abundance of caution from a team who has earned the right to be cautious because they're just that far ahead of everyone else. Although Perth are closing in, I think.
Yeah, don't worry.
They've still won 3 more games than Perth because Perth had a bad start. So yeah, Shea Illy's there. Flynn Cameron is there.
Yeah, that's
Flynn Cameron in his first season as a professional, son of Pero Cameron. Obviously, he's doing tidy things as a rookie. Some games where he's more influential than others. Some games where he doesn't really play at all. But he's been there or thereabouts all season, learning his trade. Chose to sign with Melbourne, obviously, whereas the Breakers don't seem to want to sign dudes of his ilk coming out of the college stuff. Yeah. And then also another ex-Breaker, Rob Lowe, spent the first sort of third of the season there as an injury replacement, but he's finished that stint now. But was really good while he was there, and has also re-signed on for another NBL season. So he's supposedly retired he came out of retirement from the NBL to play for Melbourne because it was a short-term deal, and apparently hasn't retired from New Zealand NBL at least, so that's cool. We still get to see him because he is the reigning MVP of that. So there's 3 Kiwis who have played for Melbourne this year.
Yeah, you always manage to squeeze in Rob Lowe. Important to
Well,
note,
he was there.
he was
He's
there,
not
but
there
he's not
now,
there
but he
now.
was
So if
there.
you're watching the NBL rocking and rolling, Rob Lowe is not there at the moment.
They did leave the door open to him possibly coming back at some stage, although he seemed less keen on that than the team. So if one of the big guys gets injured, though, that is a possibility. It's not out of the realms of contention.
And I think that does highlight a nice little like Melbourne, let alone Perth. Like they got the pipelines to New Zealand. Like, they got direct communication, they got direct scouting. They know the Kiwi basketballers who are there, and they have the relationships with to the point where someone like Rob Lowe, hey mate, we need a hand. Can you help us? Yeah, I don't want to, but I will help you. Like that is how the best NBL teams, again, like the best Kiwi NRL teams, these NBL teams, they've got their tentacles throughout Aotearoa, and they do have a lot of those kind of pipelines and relationships set up. We talked about Perth last week because they did smoke the Breakers. Don't think there's anything to add there.
Uh, well, no, a little bit because they had another convincing win this week. Can't remember who they beat, but as part of that, Ty Webster scored 20 points. So fantastic effort from him. Haram Harris again, limited minutes because he got into foul trouble. But I worked out they've won 10. They're 10-2 in games where Haram Harris plays at least 10 minutes, and they're 8-0 in games where Ty Webster plays at least 20 minutes. So when those two have been prominent, as they have been for the last couple of months, because Perth, remember, the first month or so was terrible. And there was the one game they got booed out of their home stadium after losing, and things looking pretty shocking at that point. Everything has turned around. They've just stayed the course. They've elevated. Haram Harris was one of the things that started changing things, was him getting more minutes, but him specifically also getting starters minutes. Not like starters minutes over the course of the game, but just being in the starting lineup, setting a tone, bringing that energy for the start, and giving the rest of the guys something to build from. And he does commit a lot of fouls, so he does get limited to 10-15 minute range most weeks, but they're also very important minutes at the start of each half to sort of just get the team up and rolling with his energy. And yeah, Ty Webster has come in beautifully recently. He's playing some excellent stuff, best stuff he's played since he was last at the Breakers, and only a couple minutes at the end of the game. But Corey Webster did make his return from injury. He's been out with an ankle injury for a while, but he did get a couple minutes in garbage time of that game just to, start to get the ball rolling for him as well, as did DP Jack Andrew, another Kiwi guy. Plays for, did he play for Canterbury last year, or one of the South Island teams anyway? He's a Kiwi development player over at Perth, who also have Dante Russo-Nance, who played a few games at the start of the year, haven't seen anything from him since, so I don't know what he's doing. But he did recently re-sign with, not re-sign, he signed with Otago for the upcoming season, because obviously Otago and Perth Wildcats, they have some shared ownership, which is why Ty Webster played for Otago last season, and et cetera, et cetera. They've got a bit of a flow-on thing going there. So speaking of Kiwi links, speaking of the development pathways, there's a very, very obvious direct one for the Perth Wildcats right there.
Yeah, I was just throwing that out there as like some little brainwave I had, and there's an actual
no. There's a real tangible one. Right
Otago. Let's just like there's obviously some other Kiwis and lesser performing teams. Tasmania, has Tommy V played for Tasmania? And are there any other Kiwis catching your attention for Tasmania? The Jack Jumpers, the Jumping Jacks.
Well, Walter Brown's a DP, but the development players don't play that often. They're not necessarily on the roster every time, and when they do play, it's generally because it's garbage time. But he's got a few appearances in there this season. Tall Black's wingman there, and no, Tommy V hasn't played yet, but he was on the card for the most recent game. So I don't know if that meant he was there and just a little bit too soon, or I don't know, but I would expect a debut this season, because they did sign him as like an injury replacement. So they obviously need his minutes. They didn't sign him just to come and hang around for work experience. They want him out there. So I think this week is probably the opportunity for a Tom Vodanovic debut. But that is an important signing, I guess, from the Kiwi perspective here, because that does mean that across the top, or all the top teams, basically. I think every team has a New Zealander except maybe Illawarra. I don't think do. but it just shows the proliferation there. And now Vodanovic, because obviously Tasmania only had one dude as DP before, Vodanovic will be getting some minutes. So that is now also not just a Kiwi on the roster, but a Kiwi who's actually going to be playing for them each week and doing some stuff.